Hey everybody, and welcome back to Parkitect. It's been a couple of weeks since we've done a scenario build on here, but we are jumping back in to the Parkitect campaign as we continue through our generally vanilla playthrough without mods. We've gone through 2 campaign parks so far, and now we're on to the 3rd, which gives us an option here. There are 2 different ones, which is kind of cool how they set that up so that you're not just hemmed in doing the next one down the line. So we got 2 options today for our builds. The first one here, Victoria Lake, is sort of similar to Leafy Lake in the RCT1 games, where essentially you have a big lake and you can build around it. Lots of space to work with and all that sort of thing. Certain amount of people in the park and get tickets sold and that sort of thing. So it's kind of straightforward. And then Western Roundup here, which is our first of the themed maps. Which is what the one we're going to do. So we have to sell a certain amount of tickets, and we have to have a certain amount of guests in the park. It's 500 guests, it's 800 tickets, and then keep a happiness rating above 75%. So as we zoom around the park real quick, you could see what we had there. Not a whole lot of built things, but we do have a carousel and some food to work with here. So we're going to kind of start expanding out and get ourselves going. So looking at a couple of different options, we've got a few different rides to work with for this one. But we're going to start with the jumper, which I kind of like personally. It's just a nice ride in general. It's one of my wife's favorite rides as well. So we're going to start with this and build ourselves a nice little queue and get a few flat rides to begin with. So between the carousel and the jumper, that's going to get us started. I'm also going to go ahead and paint some of the pathways and everything here and get them looking a little bit darker. I feel like the orange of the standard dirt color pathway looks a little cartoony perhaps, so we're going to change that up just a bit. And then change some of the other bits and pieces here as far as the fences go. We're going to use this wood fence probably ad nauseum, I would suppose. Just with how many or how few fence options we have, I suppose, and how well this one fits into everything else. We've got a couple barrels and things like that. Barrels kind of become our theme for the day here as I accidentally recolor this ride. I do love all the little eyedroppers and kind of recoloring options you've got in this game, but it is also very easy to screw up, and with no undo button still, it's can become a little bit of a pain. So anyway, we've got those set up, and now we're good to go as far as that goes. So now we want to talk about a ride, and I say ride, I mean coaster. So we'll do some path accoutrement here as we're talking through what we want to do next. So kind of getting our group of guys set up here, getting ready for our first opening. What I'd like to do, since we have to, our optional goal is to do this all by December of 02, year 2, is to start with the game pause, basically spend all of our money, build everything, maybe get a loan, and then do all that before we even open the park. Gives us some options and lets us get going ahead of time, get something into the park. So we're going to build a wooden coaster here, and it's going to take me a minute to get started here just to find out just the right spot. Parkitect's lack of ability to let you start wherever, you have to start with a station platform, is a little bit annoying, for one, just because it doesn't let you start exactly where you want as far as pieces go, which is my preference typically. I like to start with sort of feature elements, but we'll live and learn and figure out the best way to do this. So I'm starting out here with trying to do something a little bit more unique. So looking at this diagonal first drop, I had forgotten how shallow the first drops are on the wooden coaster, or the steepest drop is on the wooden coaster in this game, which I know we can use mods to get rid of that, but for now we're trying to play without mods, so we're going to kind of leave that alone. But when it turns out in the end, I don't really like the diagonal drop, so we're going to start with a big drop, and then we're going to go through and do a little speed hill here. The idea for this coaster is CCI wooden coaster, which I find relatively straightforward in this game, and it also lets you do a little bit more awkward stuff to some of the elements. These turnarounds with the little dip in the middle of them are sort of their signature deal. So we're going to do that, and then just try and get some diagonals into the mix. In general, in RCT and in Parkitect, really the interest as far as coaster design really lies in use of diagonals and use of kind of good elements that keep the ride kind of changing directions without just turning hard 90s or hard 180s. I always try and go a little bit more than that if we can, like a 270 or just throwing diagonals in there. The diagonals on this game happen to be kind of gigantic as far as the turns go, so it's a little bit more difficult on coasters, but it's nonetheless, we're still making progress with it. So we've gone back and wrapped around the lift hill, and then we're trying to do this kind of out and back option. I thought I'd left enough space in between those two rails for 2 tracks, but I didn't. I can only do kind of 1.5, so we're looking at some different options here. And eventually we settle on just going straight on through, over top of the first turn, and underneath of that return hill there, and then doing this nice little kind of dive and climb by the carousel, and then dropping back underneath, which I actually thought looked really nice and turned out particularly well on the different layout. And then just trying to work out how steep that goes and how well that puts together. You don't see a lot of like down to the ground high speed corners from CCI. Usually that's also very underbanked. So that first turn right there off of the drop would be kind of super underbanked for the whole thing. But here we are, kind of trying to wrap up at the end. I wanted a diagonal brake run, just kind of because. I do like the fact that you can do both diagonal and inclined brakes in this game, that you can't do that in RCT, at least without shoestringing. So trying to figure out the best way to do this, where it crosses over underneath the lift hill and over top of that last dip. Just one more interaction, which is pretty nice. And then just trying to get this to angle in correctly. You see a lot of CCI coasters, especially the earlier ones, where the brake run is very high up off the ground, and the once the ride stopped, then it drops down to station level, and that's just a decreased wear and tear sort of thing. So when you're stopping up high, the train's not going quite as fast, so it's easier to get a train stop without causing quite as much wear. But what we ended up with was a slightly declined brake run, and then a flat section for block brakes, and then another turn, and then another block brake section. We're going to do a transfer track on that at some point. Actually, it's going to be like the very last thing we'll do, but I do like the realism of that. So now I'm seeing here where this turn basically took out all of my supports on this section. And although I'm not using mods, which is I guess limiting my ability to do anything interesting with supports as far as that goes, there are still some options. So we're going to use the trim pieces, the borders, and the shapes to make ourselves at least an attempt at getting some supports in here. So at least from a distance, it kind of visibly looks like everything's going okay. So that's the plan right now. So we're setting this up. We've got our train here. Get the test all done, and then starting to figure out what this station becomes. And then also trying to figure out, too, how we're going to get a pathway across to the other side eventually, because that's going to be a bit of a challenge here as we move along. The biggest challenge I find with stations right now is trying to get away from the rectangle. So it's a 3 by however long your station is. And while that works, I don't necessarily want to go that way the whole time. So we're going to try and do something a little bit different, and put just different shapes in there just to keep it interesting. I am going to run the exit and the entrance path kind of along the line of the station. Ideally, realistically, there'd be cattle pens through there, or kind of the chutes to line you up at each row, which when we get into more sandbox play, we'll be sure to tackle more of that sort of thing. But this way, it just fills up the station nicely. Trying to build a little plaza there. I'm not a huge fan of just pulling Q right off of kind of a long, narrow path. So I like to have a bit of a plaza if we can do it. So that's what that one is there. And then starting to look at what this structure becomes. So we have this base using the castle walls, and then a kind of wood structure here. I kind of was looking at this as maybe a fort outpost type theme, perhaps. So that's where we started with this kind of overall look. And then using these wood poles, I've been using the square pillars in the previous 2 playthroughs. So this is an opportunity where these are properly themed, since you can't color change these guys. They're just that same wood. So we wanted to do like a little bit of a porch here on the front, opened up with our kind of walkway down in front of it, back to ground level. And then I thought maybe a tower here on the front side might be a good option, sort of a lookout tower of some kind. And then just carry this roof across, and I'll cover up one of the ramps on the other side so we have a 4 across. Station is slightly lopsided, which is okay. Really, you're realistically going to have more on the entry side with queue and such than you are going to on the exit side. So using these poles, now the best way to use these poles is slightly inset from the edge of the tile. So then it kind of goes up through the roof building rather than kind of on the edge corner like it is now. But in this case, I wanted it to be on the edge, but we are going to change that up a little bit here on some of the other builds as we go through the space. You'll see that the pole object and the barrel object are going to be our MVP for this park build as far as theming goes. So just looking at different path textures, things like that. So we really don't have a lot of landscape options here either if we're going to go with this cacti kind of setup, but that's okay. There's not a whole lot of landscape anyway. So we do have our rocks, and we can change colors on those. We're going to copy the same color as the existing ones, which is good. Then here's our barrels coming in to do their thing, because of course you need barrels stacked around. That's a good theme park, apparently. All right, so trying to wrap up some details here, put some flags on top of this little tower. Not exactly an access hatch or anything up top, but I guess you're not really going to see that except from the ride itself, so we'll leave that alone as it is right now. All right, so we're going to open up the park just a little bit and get some folks in here, get them going a little bit to start, and then just kind of looking at doing color changes, things like that, get everything looking right. We don't have a staff building, so there was thoughts about what we need to do there as far as staff break room goes. So eventually we're going to drop a staff building right back in our area here. So that's the spot. Just need to get the money for it, which we're already out of money. We timed that just right as far as the builds go. But we're going to take out the big loan, so the $20 or $14,000 loan, I think, that has the highest interest rate, and that isn't going to bite us, but it's not going to help us later. We're going to get into some money trouble here, kind of midstream, I would say. But as we expand, we really only have this side to expand to, considering that the wooden coaster is sort of in the way. So we're going to look at a couple different options. We ended up settling this time on the log flume, which is another tracked ride. And with the loan, we can do a lot more with it. But the hard part with the log flume is figuring out where we want to start, because there's just kind of a narrow spot here in general, but we want to make this kind of fit within this overall space, and I want to drop it into a pool. Typically, you want to have a pool for a log flume to drop into, because there's going to be a retention pond, so all that water that splashes out is going to be retained, and you can recycle it into your system and use it again. And then also when you drain and you fill a log flume or a rapids, or any water ride really, you can more quickly fill it when you have water there already, rather than bringing it in from like a domestic source, for example. So you save some money there too, operationally. So here we are trying to very much struggle at building a ride without starting right at the station, because I knew where I wanted my splash to go and not necessarily where I wanted my station to go. So that's what we're struggling to figure out here. But we finally get it. We have our station platform, have our drop, have our splash area, and now we're going to try and build a little bit here. Again, I am using diagonals largely just because I can, because it's just not really been a thing we've had to use prior to this, which is nice. But the also because I just want to play around with it. So trying a couple different options here as far as that goes, and really none of them worked in the tight space that we had to play around with here. So we're gonna just do a little bit of diagonal work with an S bend here and a little quick drop, and then a kind of mini drop here, kind of halfway through. Good splash down, and then we'll turn around and come up the lift and drop through for the big splash here at the end. So now I'm making my retention pond pool and thinking about this in terms of a guest view. So as the guests are walking down that path, they're going to see this splash really well, and it's going to be a good focal point of this section of the park. So expand that path out, use the wood over top of the water here, and then kind of create a little space. We'll actually craft sort of a corner there that we can eventually turn into a building here a little later on, just to kind of fill in that space nicely. So the idea of putting the drop and the lift hill over top of the station was somewhat intentional here, and it was one of those things where it was intentional but only to a point where I hadn't really thought about how it was going to mix in the overall look of that station. So this kind of next little bit is me figuring out how to do that, and also stalling in the meantime by doing other bits and pieces that I know we're eventually going to need. So filling in some of these little planters here with some of these grasses and the cacti. The grasses ended up being a huge help, I think, overall, just to really fill in some of those areas while keeping it sparse kind of across the whole space. So getting all of our little pathway details and everything in there. Actually, the pathway details are pretty important in this game, especially the benches. The peeps do use the benches here pretty substantially. And then trying to do a little fountain here with the barrels and the cacti. Nice little feature as well. And now I'm trying to see what may be a good option for the supporting this log flume drop. So we kind of want to do a little bit of a tower or a covering over top of it. So the only thing we're going to settle here for as far as the covering goes is this one piece right at the top of the drop, like at the precipice as you're going over. And then you can see I'm insetting those pillars, the wood columns like we talked about before, just slightly, and it looks better, I think. And then we're going to use these red metal roofs, which is kind of a nice little iconic color, at least, just so it's very recognizable compared to browns and greens otherwise. Just that nice splash of color always helps, especially when you're in the desert and you don't have green and other landscape colors. It's really good to have pops of color in there. So we're going to use a lot of red and a lot of warm colors this map, this go around. So we'll see that used here for sure, but we don't want to overuse it. So we'll just do a little bit throughout the space. I do have more of this kind of darker gray roof for the rest of it. And still not quite sure what I'm doing here as we're going along. We're just kind of stream of consciousness building, which is sometimes fine. It works relatively well, but it's also one of those things that you just got to sort of figure out what the best way to do it is and then roll with it. And if it looks good, then keep it. If it doesn't, then redo it. And that's sort of the approach that I'm taking through these scenario builds. Typically, like when I'm building RCT for like full parks and everything, I'm going to spend a long time on a lot of this stuff and rebuild it and build it and rebuild it just to make sure that it is exactly what I want it to be. This, not so much, which is fine. I think this is a totally different style of building, and it's one of those things where it's sort of a good out of my comfort zone sort of thing to be able to just kind of build without really going back through and deleting. Also, I have like scenario goals and things that I still have to pay attention to, so I can't just kind of go hog wild on just thematic or take my time on things, because there's definitely a limit. And that's also why I like to live stream it, because it sort of forces me to just go and just build, as opposed to RCT where, years can pass and I'll still be working on the same park. So we're wrapping up this building right now. We kind of more or less figured it out. Have this sort of log type base, the wood look walls. Kind of a tall building, but it helps get that whole overall drop in scale just a little bit. I do like the little pathway up and around for the exit over top of the log flume. I think that turned out pretty nicely. And then the red roofs in that section call that out very, very nicely too. So we'll drop in some of our landscape here and do a little bit of cactus work, a little bit of rock work, more of these aloe plants sort of all over just to scatter them around. I did custom support the entire lift hill, although I didn't go back through and remove all the original supports. I feel like that's one of those things that I'll do at another point. Or if I was doing this more as a sandbox mode, I could go back and do that. But, for our scenario play right now, we're not going to worry too hard about that, and we can kind of leave it as is. So getting all those final little window details and things like that in as we get this opened up. We're going to test it out with some of the logs, and then we'll increase the amount of logs here just to make sure that we have enough and not too many. It's one of the issues with, not an issue necessarily, but with open RCT and with RCT, sometimes when you open up a log flume, you'll have way more logs than you need, and there will still be a nice big backlog, no pun intended, of logs at the station when the first one comes back around at regular dispatch intervals, which I don't want that, but I also don't want it to be starved for a while where it's just kind of sitting there. So we're wanting to make sure that we increase that just right. And it seems like Parkitect estimates those pretty darn well through the whole thing. Alright, so now we're looking at what we can do to expand this park kind of overall, and I wanted to use this little oasis area here for something, and I did block it on one side with the coaster, which ended up becoming more of a backdrop than anything, and I think that's probably okay. But we need to cut across this wooden coaster, which is not my favorite, just kind of scrambling underneath of there. It just doesn't seem very well planned, but I feel like we made some decent headway on that overall. So on the back side here, with our last $5,000 for this loan, I wanted to do this Gravitron, but I didn't want it out in the open. For me, Gravitrons are very carnival-esque, and that's well and good, but it doesn't seem to fit in a theme park. So my overall thought here was, let's build a building around this, and let's theme the thing so it looks like something more intentional as far as that goes, and so it can be more of that carnival type ride, but with some theming on it. Worlds of Fun in Kansas City has, I think it's a Trabant flat ride inside a building, and it actually really enhances the ride itself. I love the companies, there are parks that have scramblers inside buildings. I always think it looks really nice, just in general. I'm a pretty big fan of indoor rides just as a whole. I think it's a good way to go about it. So we're doing this sort of like barn industrial type space using the corrugated metal pieces for the walls and then also for the roof, and trying to figure out kind of how we want to color this whole thing and how we want to paint it all. So while we think about that, we're going to go add all of our little details and pathway bits and stuff. Now I did, between the last scenario and this scenario, download both the Taste of Adventure and the Booms and Blooms DLC. So some of what you have here are those bits and pieces, including some of the landscape that we'll use a little later on. So while I intended to keep it mostly vanilla, I'll still kind of consider that to be vanilla, but that's probably okay. These are this 3D lettering is one of the things that comes in a very nice option for the DLC, so I will be using that quite a bit more. So there's Frank's Red Hot TNT Storage. So the idea is basically it's just a TNT storage building, and it's an explosion or something happens inside, and that's what you're getting pushed up against the wall with on the inside. And shout out to Frank, Saxman 1089, who was in chat, and that's where we get the name for this one. And now we're kind of stacking through here, putting some theming in, and we've only got a little bit more money left for the overall loan that we had taken out. So we're going to try and do a little bit of building as far as shops and stalls, because we don't have a lot of those just yet. So we're going to use this little triangle here and kind of feed it in to this spot. Nice little western building. I like the pale yellow color for it. Like you can make these more colorful than I think a lot of people think they need to be, with not too much effort. So we'll put a little depot here and some of the stalls, probably a little close to the home depot, I guess. I didn't intend to mean that, but it is a little close to the main depot there by the front of the park. So we probably didn't need one, but I guess I like the efficiency of it. Those are surprisingly expensive in the game. They're like $2,000, which did not expect initially, and kind of put that down without really paying attention to it. So that was sort of a shame. Now we'll build our little facade here and build that up above this porch space as well. So we're doing the wood underneath the porch roofs, and then we'll have the dirt pathway on the outside. Sort of copying that same motif for the wood columns as we go along. So what I believe this was Silverette did on the original scenario build, we're gonna try and do the same spirit of all of that through the whole thing. So we have 3 shops there, taking care of that and making sure that all goes, and we get our first hit of the Vandals. And we'll actually see throughout this playthrough a number of these times, which is really interesting. Actually, I like this mechanic in the game. I think it's a fun feature, and I think it's kind of a cool idea. But at the same time, it really gets annoying after a while when you're doing it 3, 4, 5 times in a scenario. Like if it was a once or twice thing, then I get it. Or if security was a little more effective in taking care of them, then that makes sense. But from what I've seen so far, and granted I haven't had a large spend on security team members, it always seems a little bit overpowered to me as far as that goes. So please excuse us as we move around and try and take care of all these sorts of things. I will say the lenses that they provide, so where it was green and red and all of that, is actually a really nice feature, because it lets you sort of see what's going on as far as decoration, as far as where you have spills or trash or things like that. And it's just a really nice way to zero in on all that without having to kind of take your time going around the whole thing, seeing what's going on. So now as we're continuing to build, we're really kind of teetering on the edge of no money. So we're doing plus a little bit of money right now, plus in the $7 range, but it doesn't get us a whole heck of a lot for the whole thing. So we're gonna do some marketing campaigns, see if we can't bring some guests in. It is pay per ride, so there's not a whole lot of challenge there with bringing the guest in, so you don't get that initial surge of new guests, or new guest money, but they will spend once they get into the park, and at some pretty obscene costs. Like for the wooden coaster, if they'll ride it, you get a lot of money out of it, and we are making a pretty good profit on that wooden coaster for sure. So I want to build a Western village back here, and I need some money to do that, and my hope was to roll right out of these rides into that, but it wasn't to be. And just seeing kind of where we are on the money back and forth, we really needed to do something to this. So you can take out 2 loans at any one particular time. So my thought ended up being, what can we do to help build this along? So I said, well, I have the standard wild mouse that we used in the Chinute Airfield campaign the last time around. So we're going to do that again. So I went ahead and got the smallest loan with the least amount of interest, and I dropped in our standard mock wild mouse here. And I know well enough that this is going to pump guests through. It's going to do really well for us. So even though it's a standard thing, we've already used it, we're going to give it another shot. So that's where we did with this. I feel like that was a good spend of our money. No money for theming at the time or anything like that, so we're going to kind of leave that alone. But it's going to get us there, and you can see as I'm bringing in money, I'm paying down our loan just little by little, $100 here, $100 there, because as you pay it down, there's less and less interest, there's less and less hitting against our monthly bottom line. So for this map, really, this wild mouse kind of saved our skin as far as profitability and things like that. So I know that it's a little more challenging in these campaigns than, say, are the RCT ones as far as making money and being successful. And only 3 in. It's not that this is a terribly difficult one just yet, but we definitely want to pay more attention to how we're making our money and how we're kind of doing those critical max of things. So before this one, we had 5 rides really. We had the jumper, the carousel, the wooden coaster, the log flume, and the gravitron. They were doing okay for us, the wooden coaster especially. Here's a split up on ride of it, so you can kind of see that. But needed more than that. And coasters are super overpowered in this game as far as profitability goes and guest attraction and things like that. So really that Wild Mouse did more for us than really any of those other flat rides. But just to keep guests coming through the park, we are going to look at some more flat rides. And actually that Wild Mouse is going to be the last coaster that we're going to place in this map. Because really once we get through that one, we're going to be okay as far as overall costs go as we come back from this. So looking at a couple different options for everything, we're zoom around real quick here and then look at placing some new rides. So we're going to do a scrambler. We're going to just kind of plonk it down here along the pathway. I already said that's not my favorite thing to do, is right along the path, but it's probably okay as far as this one goes. We're going to just give a good additional kind of people eater as far as this goes. And to be fair, it did manage a decent queue for a little while. I was making a comment too about how the rain in this game is also pretty overpowered. In fact, how quickly it can kind of stop your profits kind of mid-track. And of course, it started raining right after we placed this ride. So that was an unfortunate move. And as for placing the landscaping here, I kind of thought through a little further and said, well, we really ought to, rather than placing landscaping, consider covering that building. So when it rains here for a second time in a row, we're going to cover that scrambler, which is very well needed. And here we've got our second Vandal Attack as we run around and try and clear these guys out, which is kind of fun, finding the different guys. And it's a clever way to do it that all of them have their caps on backwards and have the bandanas, and none of the other guests have that. So it's easy to spot as far as that goes, but it still takes a little bit of doing. It's funny watching the Vandals in their bandana and everything, like riding the rides. It just feels really silly watching them kind of sit with 3 other people that are just totally fine with this dude coming around in the park also riding this log flume with them. So it's kind of a funny little feature, I think, as far as that goes. But we're going to keep on doing some of these advertisements just to get people through the gate. We're not really in danger of missing anything because we just started year 2 and we've nearly hit our goals as far as the 500 guests in the park. But we still need to get to that 800 guests. Excuse me. And we'll need to sell more tickets to do that. So while I only need 500 in the park, I need 800 tickets sold total. So really we can have 300 folks come and go and still not quite be at our goal just yet. We renamed the Wild Mouse to Gold Rush, so we're kind of doing a mine theme for this kind of overall thing. And we're going to do a little bit heavier theming here, but didn't really end up getting there. And I started doing this and started kind of getting at something, and then I said, well, it's raining, and it would be a better idea for me to go through and do something with this money that's more useful than theming the station. So that's how we ended up with our covering here for the scrambler. I did leave a gap in the top with the glass in there so we can see the ride. Realistically, I don't think you'd ever really see that from a park, but from our perspective here, isometric and isometric-ish, I suppose, but at least at the kind of top-down angle that we're looking at, it makes a lot more sense to be able to see the ride on top. So here we jump back to the station here for a minute. And then once again, going to look at getting distracted. Again, you'll see this playthrough, especially here towards the end, I kind of jumped around to a bunch of different things as we went along, but doing pretty well as far as attendance goes now. Noticing that I missed some supports on this side, so that wasn't oops, but kind of noticing where we are attendance wise, I thought, well, another flat ride would do it. So we're gonna drop in this other more intense flat ride that we had just gotten, the double inverter. And we'll put that on the side. And this creates a nice little L here, which helps define where we want to put our eventual Western Village. So here we go, setting this thing up. This is our biggest architectural build probably of the game so far as just buildings go from the campaigns that we've played so far. So we're going to do kind of these 4 separate facades in one big building. So we'll kind of Disney style that thing. So you got this blue, there's a yellow, there's a brown, and there's a red, or pinkish, I guess. So the idea is that, while they are 4 separate facades, they're all an interconnected building, they're all tied together, and we're going to use this to really establish sort of a back of house setup here. So right now I'm just kind of building these facades to establish all that, and then as we go along, we're going to drop in all of the things from the backside. So we'll have all of our shops and stalls and our maintenance areas and everything else to support these. The Western theme is very easy. It's I think one of the reasons why you see so many of them out and about in the real world, as far as smaller theme parks go, is Western themes are easy to do, and it certainly gives a sense of adventure, I think, for the park guests. I think Western themes are, at least to an extent, really kind of that spirit of adventure and exploration and things like that. So, but from our sense, it's easy to build and relatively cheap. I mean, this is a wood building, relatively small, generally a rectangle. Excuse me. And then we've got essentially a front facade on there that's a little taller, and it's kind of fake windows and everything up on top, and then that all fills out the various front areas. We have our covering usually over top of some kind of a porch or a patio with supports, and that's about it. So you can see what we're doing here with the yellow and the brown building. We do have those covered patio areas, and in the blue and the red we have doors that go right into the space and then a porch up on top. And now we're defining out the building just a little bit here, trying to keep it a little bit varied. There's really no rhyme or reason to how the backside shapes up, since we're not really building a shop or a restaurant that has legitimate floor space. We don't have to worry too hard about it. Here we go. As we win the scenario there, you saw the confetti coming down as we put our water tower and what I figured to be somewhat an appropriate fountain underneath that water tower. That completes our goal. So we had 500 guests in the park. We had 800 tickets sold. We had 75% or higher park rating. And that was in September, I think it was, of year 2, which is a couple months ahead of our schedule. So now, as I like to do typically, we're going to go back and fill in this map. And I'm not going to fill the whole thing because that would take too long. And I do want to keep moving on these scenarios as far as the playthroughs go. I'm not looking to make anything kind of super impressive or iconic. I just want to really practice with the various parts and pieces, do some theming, use different rides that I haven't really used yet, and try and get more of that just learning of how to play and how to play reasonably competently in this game. So we're going to start to finish up our facades here, finish up most of this, and then we'll leave that red one there till a little bit later on, and we'll come back to that one in just a little bit as we kind of jump around. So using those palm trees, those are from an expansion pack. I think that's Booms and Blooms. Beautiful trees, and actually that was one of the things that this game, back when we were doing pre-alpha on this, really needed was decent landscaping and very cartoony early on. But I think that expansion pack especially, and then of course all the mods, because there's plenty of those, really helped to up the level of kind of detail on the scenery pieces. I mean, this game is still sort of a cartoony scenery, cartoony slash simple appearance for scenery, which is not a bad thing by any means. I mean, right now it's all larger walls, just full tile wall pieces, full tile um, roof pieces, things like that, which kind of remind me of the earlier kind of no custom scenery days of RCT. Now, again, there's plenty of mods for smaller things as well, but this is kind of the larger full tile unit scenery pieces that make things easy to place and easy to put down throughout the whole space, and that's why it goes so fast. For me to do a park of this size in RCT to any kind of quality, it would take me quite a lot longer, especially with the scenery building features there. There's just quite a lot more that would have to be figured out. So now we're going to jump back to this Wild Mouse and try and finally get this thing done and finished. Trying to figure out how to build this without totally copying what I did in Tnt Airfield, because I did also use metal on that one. So we're trying to do something a little bit different. So I thought, well, if it's mine train themed, we should at least try and do some kind of a mine tower with the winch on top. So we're going to build this tower, and then I started doing an angled piece out towards the front, and it was just way too big because these pieces aren't terribly steep in the overall. We're at 45 degrees more or less. So we're going to go this direction and readjust our exit path to work a little bit better with that. And then kind of build up some of these details. I did not bother going through like I did in Tnt and getting rid of some of the supports in the middle. I don't think the impact is huge, and I don't think it's necessary, especially for scenario play. I mean, if I was doing this in like a sandbox type build, I'd be building my own supports on the thing with mods and all that sort of stuff. So we're gonna just leave it as it is because it's totally fine. And then for the building itself, I don't really know what I'm doing here, to be honest. It's just sort of a formwork with a sort of scissor roof up top and some kind of glass looking in. A couple pipes on this side, because why not? No real rhyme or reason for some of this necessarily, but changing up the landscape texture just a little bit to give it that sort of rocky look. I mean, it is mine themed, so I figure it should look sort of industrial throughout the whole thing. And then dropping in some of these different theming elements and bits and pieces like those rails, the mine cars, and everything like that. Here is our third round of Vandals, which is, if you're keeping track, that's quite a lot for a pretty short playthrough. I mean, all told, this is probably about 8 hours of play. This video is about an hour long, and I sped this up by 8, so it's probably 7 to 8 hours worth of play for this scenario, which is not too bad, I don't think, to make a scenario and then also kind of fill it out a little bit, make it look good. Because you can easily beat these, I would think, if you go for the absolute most strategic elements quite a lot faster, and most of those aren't going to include a ton of scenery. But, we don't want to play that way. We want to make this a little better themed, a little more interesting, so that's what we're going to do. So for this building here, I wanted to put a sign on the front, and I figured it would be somebody's mining company, so I figured our first loan company who gave us that loan, Curry State, might as well do that. I do like there's a little bit of lore in this game as far as like Happy Co., which we'll see in some other scenarios here in the future. So it is kind of fun having those kind of bits and pieces. We had this little tiny 2x2 restroom building over here, which I'm expanding out to a seating area and also dropping in one of those trash chutes for the handyman, which we did when I stopped to look around in this map a little later on. We had some challenges with cleaning trash and things like that, so I've never really bothered with the air patrol areas yet, but it may be something as we get into larger parks or where we're a little more on the line as far as completing scenario goals. I may need to go ahead and look at that in the future for some potential options for what we can and can't do, just to keep that going. So because we have a lot of space in here, and I really didn't have that many shops and stalls, I went ahead and dropped the staff training room in there just to give us some kind of all those various features, and it's not like we're filling it up with any kind of shops and stalls. But I did change the research here to shops and stalls at one point, which we got ourselves a turkey leg and a snow cone building, which were both pretty useful for the whole thing. And then just trying to finish some of these facades for this whole space here. I mean, they're all pretty much the same sort of take on, same take on this sort of concept overall. Just trying to get detail in as far as bits and pieces go. And a relatively simple amount of props and things like that. We've got our wagon wheels, we've got our skulls, we've got the TNT boxes and the crates and things like that. So I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do that. I also thought across the way here I'd drop a little seating area as far as covered seating goes. I don't know if guests seek benches in cover when it's raining. I would assume, since they are attuned to other things when it's raining, they probably do. But I figured, well, why not? We might as well drop something in here just to kind of fill in this little square that we had to work with, and then also just give us a little bit of space kind of in general for this particular spot. Dropping some of our landscaping here, those grasses again being the MVP. Definitely killing it for that whole thing. And then I dropped this one tree in here, and this is the only kind of standard tree, I guess, within the game. I just thought it looked nice. Has a nice little overhang. It works well with the benches and everything else. So I thought that would be a good look for the whole thing. And now we're just trying to see what else we want to do here. And it's not too much overall. We paid back our last loan there, so now we're home free as far as costs go and all of that. So Vandals here, number, what was this, 4 or 5? Take these guys out real quick. But at this point, I wanted to finish up the scenario, but I wanted to do it in a way that kind of tied up loose ends, made sure that we weren't kind of having a path to somewhere that just sort of ended. And one of those paths is right here at the end of this big facade, our row of facades. We really just didn't want to end it there. So I thought, well, we can place some flat rides there, which we'll do in a little bit, and then carry that pathway around the back of the Wild Mouse. So that way everybody's got sort of a 360 loop as far as pathway goes. But before we get there, working on just one more facade here, keeping it pretty simple. We used the log cabin texture, so there's sort of two wood type textures. There's this one that the pink and blue building are formed from, which is more dimensional planks. So I would imagine like a log cabin, versus the interior ones, which are more like a board siding type setup. Just a variety, just to keep it interesting. They all do the same thing, but just do what we can to keep it interesting. I did try some different awnings here. These awnings aren't working for me in general. It's not my choice as far as what I think looks good. So we're just going to leave that alone, do the standard awnings, and then we're going to put these kind of vertical elements here on top just to break up that overall look and keep it something different, a little fresh compared to the other areas. So this gets us nearly done with our architecture within this map. We're not going to do a whole heck of a lot more as far as that goes. One of the things I talked about throughout the entire stream was that I wanted to do a go-kart track, because I hadn't done one in a scenario just yet, but I wanted to figure out a way to use these two buildings that were existing on the map as sort of scenery elements for the karts themselves. So we didn't use it quite in the same manner as I maybe planned, so it wasn't super involved as far as theming goes, but we did have a couple of nice little spots here for the whole thing. It's a simple element, or a simple track. We're not doing any elevation changes. We're not doing any helixes, which I love the fact that you can do those, though. So those features really is what help Parkitect to excel. especially when compared to RCT, is just the variety of track elements that you have for these sorts of rides like this or the Rapids ride. There's just a lot you can do with it. So we did our metal roof. We're going to give it this sort of checkerboard theme, but still sort of weathered and darker. It'll still fit the overall thing. Go-kart tracks aren't something you typically see in a theme park except sort of in an upcharge scenario like Six Flags maybe. But a lot of the Six Flags parks have pulled theirs out over the years. Just from an operational standpoint, it makes more sense to have something included with admission that is probably a little cheaper to maintain and operate when you don't have to staff it with a bunch of people. So we're going to drop a Ferris wheel right in here as well to help fill in the gap between all of these different spaces. So this one is going to sit right here, right up against our building, and then have sort of a backdrop fence, and that'll help define the backside of the park there. Now in this open space, I couldn't quite figure out what to do. I didn't really want to put another ride right adjacent to the Scrambler, so I went through and did a little walkway with some seating areas, some landscape elements, and a little bit of trees, things like that for the space. And then using these trellises, going to bring that bring the go-karts into it as well. Have a little seating area for the go-karts, and just try and help tie all the various areas together, elements back and forth. So we're using some of these rocks just to give it a little bit of interest as we're driving through here, and some path or ground texture changes for the whole thing. A little bit of manicured foliage with cacti, which is kind of interesting because I don't think you'd see a whole heck of a lot of that for this whole thing. But nonetheless, we're going to wrap up there and then start our last little section here. So this is a Zero Star shape, which are really impressive looking rides. I rode the one at Liseberg, and they're probably more fun to look at than they are to ride. I didn't get a whole lot of kind of thrilling out of it, although to be fair, it could have just been the ride program. But they do look super cool, and we're going to roll with that on that side. Takes up a ton of space, fills in that area really well. It offers a nice kind of variety to the double swing on the other side that also goes upside down, but this one does it with some rotation and some other things. So it just keeps it interesting. Try and be a little bit unique as far as the ride selection that we're placing and what we're placing next to each other. So two of probably the more extreme thrill rides, though, side by side here on the back. Now you can see we connected up a little one wide pathway over to the Wild Mouse exit. I don't think we need a whole lot more than that, but I did want to combine that to make it a 360 walkway around, just to give it a little bit more of a pathway flow to the whole thing. And then we're going to do one more ride. We're going to do the Observation Tower, which is one we haven't done just yet. The Observation Tower is a gentle ride, but it offers rain protection, which is great. So we can offer that as one of those types of rides. And then next to it, I'm putting a couple little refreshment stands here, and seeing that the awnings are just slightly too short for those. So we're going to use the customizable shop, and then we can drop the awnings there just fine. Put our little employee pathway back there so we can fill those up easily, and put a fence on the back side of that for a little bit of screening. So we're almost there with a little bit of theming as far as landscape goes, kind of on the back side of this, covering some of these queues, just giving us a little bit of weather protection. Because it seems to me like they will stay in the queues when it rains if there's some weather protection to the actual space. So that's what we're going to do there. So the last thing that I want to do here is build a transfer track, because we had talked about this right up at the beginning of the episode, and it's something that of course has no functionality in the scenario play as we're doing, but does have a nice look overall and has that realism touch that I'm always trying to strive for in my parks. The fun one on this is that it's diagonal, and we don't really have a whole lot of that in game so far, so we're building our first fully diagonal building. And building is a very loose sense of the word, as really it's just a flat roof with a trim piece and some poles, but nonetheless it's still something interesting. We are going to take the centerpiece here and raise it up just a little bit, Not because we need to, but just because it keeps it a little bit interesting. And in this game, where that roof is entirely textureless, whatever we can do to change elevation and other things like that is really going to make a difference. We also don't have these supports on diagonal, so we're going to kind of make it up as we go, using the square ones and then a couple of vertical columns around the whole thing. I do realize that the columns for the structure are inset of the ride structure itself, so we'd have maybe a little bit of trouble moving that transfer track, perhaps, but that's how it goes. So that was it, and now we can kind of see our completed park here as it's set up. So coming from our humble beginnings here of this little carousel to adding that jumper and really expanding that out. I never did cover that staff building, but that's all right. Our wooden coaster is probably my favorite coaster I've done in Parkitect so far, at least since I've picked the game back up. So we have this pretty nice expansive CCI layout. Only difficulty is that it cuts the park in half. So that's always a little bit of a poor choice overall. Next time I might just save the layout and replonk it somewhere else. And then our Flume with the covered drop there, or the covered piece at the top of the drop, and then kind of a unique looking building. This is maybe my favorite little bit here with the Gravitron inside and using that whole kind of barn storage type building for that space. Our scrambler over there covered, that gives us weather protection, so we have more and more of that sort of thing. I would have expected it to rain less in the desert, if I'm being honest. But here we are. The mine train, again, mine train, I say that, but the wild mouse did very well for us. Kind of saved our skin as far as costs and things like that go. And then from a just park building standpoint, we have our nice little string of facades here that led into all of these last couple attractions. So our big go-kart track here, and the Ferris wheel, and a little seating area there that turned out pretty okay. Back here it's a little light as far as fencing and other details go. Probably could have filled in a little bit more there perhaps, and maybe a building in between that observation tower and the star shape, but I think on a whole it's probably alright, and leaves us with where we are here. So that is everything. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed seeing this map. We'll stream more Parkitect here on Thursdays upcoming. So until next time, see you in the next one. Thanks.